Thank you for coming.
Yes. So thank you, Marielle. I do have a slideshow that I prepared. I'll be sharing my screen, and really what I'm going to be doing is walking you through a lot of the research that's been done since 2008 in the lab on meditation in collaboration with 2 other labs. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I always enjoy sharing some of the research I've worked on, as well as some specifics on mindfulness meditation practice that I know with everything going on in the world today, we can all use that type of practice. I think everybody worldwide is under unprecedented stress that many of us have not faced before, especially those working in the medical field.
Oh, and we didn't say that, but you guys can use the chat while Rick is talking if you guys have any technical questions during the first part, the theoretical part. Then after he's done with this theoretical part, we will give a couple 5 minutes for quick questions, and then we will move on to the practical part of the session. So just so that you guys keep in mind that you can start interacting through the chat, but then we'll have 5 minutes for concrete questions after this.
Okay, so most of the research that I'm going to be talking about comes from this collaboration with 3 main principal investigators, Dr. Giulio Tononi, whose lab I am in. He is the director of the Wisconsin Center for Sleep and Consciousness and chair of sleep medicine, and well known for his consciousness studies. The other researcher is Richard Davidson. He is the director and founder of the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds at UW-Madison, also a professor of both psychiatry and psychology at UW-Madison. And Perla Kalaman is the 3rd investigator. When this work was done, she was in Barcelona, Spain, and she's the one that does all the genetic work in this study. She's now at UC Davis. And this study started in 2008. I believe it's one of the largest studies, federally funded studies in the US, looking at the effects of meditation on long-term practitioners, but as well as other groups as well. And most of what I'm talking about here is going to be for the first 5 years, 2008 to 2013, but there's still aspects of this study that are ongoing. So just to kind of give everybody some background and get everybody on the same page about what mindfulness is. And Jon Kabat-Zinn is the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction. He worked at Massachusetts General Hospital and applied mindfulness techniques to people in chronic pain and had a lot of success in helping alleviate pain in different medical patients. And he defines mindfulness as awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And I would argue that mindfulness is inherent in many types of meditation practices and also mindfulness-based stress interventions. These include Zen, Vipassana or insight meditation, Tibetan meditators, mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, really any practice that you have to notice when you're no longer doing the practice requires a certain amount of mindfulness. And as far as meditation goes, when you use the word without defining it, if you just say meditation as a generic term, it's kind of the equivalent of saying sports without really specifying what sport you're participating in. So then mindfulness has been, at least in the research literature, broken down into 2 subcategories of concentration. One is called focused attention, or FA, and the other one is defined as open monitoring. And generally, focused attention is defined as directing your attention and sustaining it on a selected object. Beginning practice that's very common is the breath. Detecting mind wandering and distractions, such as thoughts that arise. Disengagement of attention from distractors and shifting attention back to the selected object. And cognitive reappraisal of distractors. So for example, if you notice thoughts arise, you would just label them as just a thought as opposed to fusing with that thought. And then open monitoring is slightly different. Instead of having a narrow focus, it's much more broad, and you would have no explicit focus on objects. So you just be resting kind of in awareness of the surroundings. You'd have non-reactive metacognitive monitoring. So for example, you'd watch your thoughts arise, watch your feelings arise without reacting to them, but without trying to get rid of them or do anything with them. And then just in general, you'd have non-reactive awareness of automatic cognitive and emotional interpretations of sensory, perceptual, and endogenous stimuli. So again, it's just really cultivating this space where everything can arise and you're not reacting to anything. And this study, in part, was started to address some of the problems with meditation research. Typically, a lot of the studies were small, so small sample sizes. A lot of them didn't have control groups. You had not many longitudinal studies. You had people from all sorts of different meditation traditions, so it was hard to really kind of tease out what was the effective meditation practice and what might be other things that are influencing the results you see. And the person in the top right of the screen there, that's our super monk, we like to call him, Matt Ricard. And he was the first pilot that we had that came to the center, both the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds and the Center for Sleep and Consciousness. And he's hooked up to EEG there. One of the main modalities that we use for investigating this is high density EEG, so 256 electrodes, as well as MRI and a bunch of psychological tests. And really, this is a pretty big study that's looking at investigating these primary areas: sleep, selective attention and emotion and cognitive habits, emotional reactivity and regulation, gene expression, protein regulation and immune cell aging, social stress, pain perception and regulation. So I'm going to cover a little bit from each area today. I'm trying to keep it relatively short, so it is a lot of information in a short period of time, but it's just meant to give you a general overview and how these different areas of research were carried out, and to kind of give you an idea of really the how meditation does affect the body and mind. And this study was funded really in part to determine if all the media claims that meditation is good for you, and kind of just the increase in alternative medicine in the United States in particular, but had any validity. And so this was really meant to kind of look at it in a scientific, rigorous way with these different control groups. And so these control groups, I'll just go through them briefly. We had 40 people in the control group, which had no training whatsoever. They were waitlisted, and they were allowed at the end of the study to come back and do either the HEP program or the MBSR program. The health enhancement program was also 40 people, and this was designed to be a control against the mindfulness aspect of mindfulness-based stress reduction. So you had interactions with researchers, you had some stress reduction instructions, you had very similar daily structure, you had similar home instructions, but it lacked the meditation part. So this was really our control against the meditation. Then the mindfulness-based stress reduction was 8 weeks, 8-week program that people went through. And again, 40 people and 40 long-term meditators from the Vipassana tradition throughout the United States. We flew them in, and they all came to the lab for 3 separate visits. And some of these studies I'm going to talk about, the individual studies, may have been done multiple times. And if this group isn't included in one of these studies, I'll specify that it was a different group of meditators involved in the research. So this is a paper I worked directly on. This was in sleep. This was the main finding for long-term meditators that came into the lab on their first visit. We had them do a screening night to rule out sleep disorders. But then we compared them to meditation naive practitioners. And what we found is a significant difference in the back part of the brain and gamma power, which is a faster frequency power. And when we compared this to the meditation naive, it was significant. The only other differences we found between the long-term meditators and the meditation naive subjects was the total sleep time was a little less for long-term meditators. And there's been some research on this that long-term meditators during a retreat are less, their reaction time is less compromised if they get less sleep. And then they also had a difference in wake after sleep onset. So there was slightly more awakening for the long-term meditators versus the meditation naive practitioners. And this difference in the gamma power in the back of the brain correlated very nicely with total hours of daily meditation practice. So up to 9,000 hours. So the more meditation practice you had, daily practice, the higher your gamma activity in the occipital area of the brain compared to meditation naive subjects. And we're really not exactly sure what this means. We do think that it's a sign of neuroplasticity. So, you know, for things to change during sleep, it needs to be something that really affects the brain in a more profound way. Typically, if you're learning a new task, you might see an increase in deep sleep or slow wave sleep. But we think this is just kind of a marker of some type of continuation of the meditation practice. And there's been a number of studies that have found an increase in gamma, specifically in long-term meditators, and that does correlate with lifetime hours of practice. There's also been claims amongst Tibetan meditators in particular that they're able to maintain some type of continued awareness throughout sleep, and perhaps that's going on. There was a recent study at the University of Arizona that was from someone in our lab, and they looked at people with depression that have had 3 major depressive episodes and were medication free, and they also did a sleep study and found after they did mindfulness-based stress reduction for 8 weeks, they also had an increase in this gamma power in the back part of the brain. And they also reported better sleep quality and less insomnia. So this study was to look at the selective attention and emotional and cognitive habits. Now this was a different subset of long-term meditation practitioners. They were also in the Vipassana tradition, but this was for a 3-month retreat. So they did some of these activities at the beginning and at the end of their retreat. One thing in particular is they scanned them in an MRI machine and looked at their amygdala response. And when they were in the MRI, they were told to focus on doing focused attention. So place your attention on a fixation cross. And then sounds were played, distracting sounds. And the greater the reaction in the amygdala, it's a proxy for distractibility. And so the more lifetime hours of meditation practice you had, the less reactivity you had in the amygdala, which we believe is a marker for you were less distracted by the sound and you were paying attention to your meditation practice. The next task in B is a task called attentional blink. So you see a series of targets and you're told to say, pay attention to an X. And then a short time later, there'll be an A presented and there'll be a bunch of distractor letters in there. Many people can't see the second target because it's displayed at such a short duration after the first target. And so when you looked at the brain in these meditators using EEG, you have this marker called P3B, which is shows up in the parietal area of the brain. And this is a marker of attention. And paradoxically, you see less reaction for the meditators than you do the controls, the long-term meditators. And what we think this is a sign of is being less, the first target is less sticky or you perseverate less on it. All of this is automatic. And therefore your attention is free to capture the next response as opposed to being oblivious to it. And this slide here and see this figure is, it shows your accuracy. So the more likely you were to detect the second target in this series, the less activity you had during this first target. So the less you responded, the less your brain responded based upon this P3B response. So this next part is about emotional reactivity and cognitive habits. Again, this is the same group of the Vipassana long-term meditators and the 40 meditation naive subjects. We looked at their brain, in particular looked at their right amygdala in a scanner. And they were shown a series of pictures, both positive, negative, and neutral images. And while they saw these, we recorded their brain activity and to see how much their right amygdala responds. And we didn't see any difference between the long-term meditators and the controls when they were viewing negative objects. There was a slight reduction, but it wasn't significant. We did, however, see a reduction in activity in the right amygdala when long-term meditators were looking at positive objects versus the meditation naive subjects looking at positive objects. And many people might think of the amygdala, that maybe this is a sign that the long-term meditators didn't like the positive images as much as the meditation naive. But what we think is going on is that we know from addiction research that wanting and liking can become disassociated. So we believe this is more about the wanting part, kind of the grasping at positive images. The idea is that when you're meditating, regardless of whether it's positive or negative, you don't react as much to it. And there was previous research that found this in long-term meditators for the negative images as well. And because of the time limits, I won't get into why we didn't think we found this in this case. But we did see that based upon your lifetime hours of open monitoring meditation, you had a smaller response in the right amygdala to negative pictures. So there still is a correlation between meditation practice and negative response in the amygdala to these negative images. Again, this is just looking at, instead of long-term meditators, we're comparing people in the health enhancement program. So those that didn't receive meditation instruction compared to those in the mindfulness-based stress reduction group. And we saw for positive images, a reduction in activity in the right amygdala for the MBSR group compared to the HEP group. We also looked at the connection between the right amygdala and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is a sign of kind of regulating the affect in the amygdala, the affective response. And so for the MBSR group, we saw increased connection between the amygdala and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex after meditation training, which we did not see in the HEP group. We saw this for both negative and positive images. But what was interesting is we did not find this connection in the VM-PFC with the long-term meditators. So we know from the research that meditation is different for people when they're beginning versus when they're considered expert meditators or have lifetime hours of, say, 10,000 or more hours. That a lot of these processes become automatic, and in fact, it's one of the things that can be difficult to control for when we're doing research on long-term meditators. Is when they're not doing anything, told not to meditate, their brains a lot of times tends to kind of move into this meditative state. So there's some research that you just have to be careful of not doing, knowing that that could be a confound. So this was a pretty interesting study. This is more the genetics part of it. And blood samples were taken. They were sent to Barcelona, Spain to be analyzed. This is from a paper in Psychoneuroendocrinology. And they were looking at the comparison between chronological age and biological age. One of the markers they looked at is this thing called IEAA, which is intrinsic epigenetic aging acceleration. And they've done a lot of research on this, and they found that that is a good marker for aging in general. So typically there's a strong correlation between normal aging and biological aging using this marker. They also found that it's sensitive to stress. So if you smoke or if you have a lot of psychological stress, perhaps poor diet, what will happen is even though your chronological age will be, say, 50, your biological age might be 70, for example. That might be an extreme. So they looked at long-term meditators. This first image here compares chronological age, 30 to 60, compared to their measured biological age based upon the blood sample. And if you followed this line completely, there'd be no difference between the two. meditators are in red, the controls are in blue, and you do see, especially when you get past age 50, your biological age tends to go down compared to your chronological age. When we looked at all age groups for both controls and meditators, we didn't see a difference. But when we separated them into two groups, one being over 52 years of age and one being under 52 years of age, we actually saw an increase in your biological age compared to your chronological age in controls, but a decrease for the long-term meditators in your biological age compared to your chronological age. And this correlated very nicely with years of meditation practice. So the more years of meditation you've been doing, the smaller your biological age. And more studies need to be done, but we think this is perhaps a good marker of how meditation affects the stress response and immune regulation or gene expression. This is a follow-up to that study. So what happened is they took long-term meditators and measured their blood prior to an 8-hour period of meditation, time 1 compared to time 2. And they took the whole human methylome in peripheral blood of meditators and they compared it to people in the health enhancement group, both pre and post the day of leisure. So we wanted the health enhancement group to have some type of activity. So they just hung out for 8 hours, read, relaxed, didn't meditate. And then when we looked at their methylome, time 1, what we saw was no difference at all between the groups. When we looked at the difference between time 1 and time 2 for the HEP group, the leisure group, we saw no difference. And then when we looked at the long-term meditators after 8 hours of meditation, they found 61 differentially methylated sites after a day of meditation, the long-term meditators. I think this was out of over 4,000 sites possible. But what they found that these sites were enriched in genes associated with immune cell metabolism, aging, and binding sites for several transcription factors and immune response and inflammation. These results suggest that even a short period of meditation in trained meditators may influence the epigenome. So, more work needs to be done, but I thought this was pretty exciting and interesting. So this is a measure of social stress. Everyone that came to the lab for the study did something called the Trier Social Stress Test, where they had to stand up in front of a panel of 2 people. They were recorded by video. They had to give a 5-minute talk about a fake job interview that they had about 3 minutes to prepare for. And then they also were required to do math problems out loud. So both public speaking and doing math problems, especially in front of an audience, we know produce a lot of stress. And so what they did is took saliva samples to measure cortisol in the subjects before they gave the talk. And they also put capsaicin cream on their arm to initiate kind of a inflammatory response. This is kind of the active chemical that you'd find in hot peppers, so it kind of has a burning sensation. And they looked at the flare response, so the amount that the skin reacted, and then they compared this to the cortisol. And you see in this image here, you have a reduction in cortisol compared to the mindfulness meditation naive group in the long-term meditators. And then the flare peak was smaller, significantly smaller in the long-term meditators compared to those that were not meditators. And you saw a nice correlation between the cortisol and the flare residuals in the long-term meditators. The long-term meditators are in red, the controls are in blue, and the highlights of this study were meditators had a smaller cortisol and flare response relative to non-meditators. Meditators perceived the TSST, the stress test, as less stressful than non-meditators. The cortisol response was positively associated with size of the flare response, and meditators showed closer alignment between measured and perceived stress response. So we did ask them how stressed they were, and it seemed to match very well their physiological findings with their psychological findings. This just kind of shows that how stressful they perceived the test to be was similar to their cortisol response. So in the MNP group, the more stressful, the higher the response. Same thing with the long-term meditators. This was a study looking at pain perception, and they wanted to compare these two different types of meditation, both focused attention and open monitoring, and both novices, so people that just begin to learn meditation, and those that are experts. There's a similar study done with this large cohort, but this particular study was done in a smaller group of Tibetan meditators in Davidson's lab, 9 long-term Tibetan meditators. And we looked at the difference between intensity and unpleasantness. So if a meditator was doing, a long-term meditator was doing focused attention, or a novice had just learned focused attention, we had them rate how much they perceived the pain. And the pain was administered through heat on the forearm. Water was kind of pumped through a device that heated up the arm. It was calibrated before, so we didn't exceed, I believe it was 49 Celsius. And we wanted them to rate the pain at about an 8 on a scale from 0 to 10. And so they were told to do this meditation practice. And then right after the pain went away, they were asked how intense it was and how unpleasant it was. The people that just learned meditation rated the intensity higher than the unpleasantness, but there was no difference between the intensity between the beginners and the long-term meditators doing focused attention. There was a slight reduction between the experts on unpleasantness and the beginning meditators during focused attention, but a significant reduction when they're doing open monitoring. So when you're just aware of what's going on, you feel the pain, you don't react. And then the expert meditators felt that that was not as unpleasant compared to the meditation naive subjects. They also felt it was less pleasant compared to when they were doing the focused attention task. And for the focused attention task, they were not focusing on the pain, they were focusing on a fixation cross. There was previous results that found focused attention did reduce both intensity and pain. And there's a couple confounds where we think maybe we didn't find it in focused attention, but it was significant in open monitoring. And this has been known for some time, that the anticipation of pain can bring it on even before the actual experience of pain. And the resistance to pain tends to make it more acute. Certainly during my own meditation practice, if I'm uncomfortable, if I just kind of allow it to be and not try to, move away from it, it just becomes less of an issue, and typically it's not as unpleasant or painful. So this is the final slide. This isn't related to the study, but it's fairly famous, at least in meditation research, and some of you may have heard of this. This was published in Science by Killingsworth and Gilbert. And they did a thing called experience sampling. So they had an app set up on an iPhone, and they pinged subjects throughout the day and asked them, what are you doing? And then secondly, if you were mind wandering. And if you were mind wandering, were you mind wandering about something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And what they found is that on average, people were mind wandering roughly, I think it was 43% of the time, which is a higher number than what we find typically in the lab. And that when they were mind wandering about unpleasant topics, they were less happy. So this scale down here is a happiness scale starting at 0 and going to 100. So the most unhappy they were is when they were asked, when they were not doing the task at hand and they were thinking about something unpleasant. If they were doing a task but were thinking about something neutral, they were still less happy. And if they were thinking about something pleasant or not mind wandering, it was pretty much the same. And the size of these circles represents how often they were doing the particular task. So the take-home message is a wandering mind is an unhappy mind, and most of the time we're mind wandering. And most people, if you ask them if they were just reading and not thinking about something else, they've reported more happiness. So this is kind of just a general take-home study that regardless of how pleasant or unpleasant a task is, we typically enjoy it more if we're just doing that versus thinking about something else. So thank you for your attention. And before we begin the mindfulness meditation practice, I certainly can answer a few questions if you have any. I know that's a lot of information, and I don't know what everybody's background is, but I just wanted to give you a broad overview of kind of the lab I've been associated with and all the work we've been doing. There's many more publications as well besides these that have come out. So it's really been, the change in meditation research in the last 20 years has been huge. There's a lot more funding, a lot more interest, and the techniques and skills to really look at what's going on in the body and the brain are becoming much more effective at finding differences.
Thank you so much for that, Rick. And yeah, I think Orly already has a question, so please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I have a little question about the control group that you used in the investigation on the research, because sometimes we lose perspective about the nutritional part, also important for the brain. So I wanted to know if the control group was also having like the same nutritional habits that the people that have long-term meditation practices.
Yeah, that's a good question. And we did try to control for as much as, in all the studies, we certainly matched for age, sex, lifestyle habits. We tried to factor those out in most of those. So, typical things that would certainly affect the brain: exercise, diet. A lot of this is self-report, so you never really know for sure how accurate and honest people are about how much they exercise and what they eat. But we did collect data on this, and we were able to kind of factor out some of these variables for sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I think, oh yeah, Luis.
Thank you very much. I have one. When you compare biological age with chronological age, does the biological side only has physiological metrics, or you also consider some cognitive inputs or anything else that's not merely physiological per se?
Yeah, in this study, it was completely physiological. It was really just the methylation sites. I know there's some research being done by Sarah Lazar. She's at, I think, Harvard, and she is starting up a study now looking at age on cognitive performance, people with Alzheimer's. So they're looking at meditation training, teaching people meditation at age 65 and older. And they found some results in the hippocampus as far as aging goes and meditation. But this was just specifically blood physiological markers. We didn't do any cognitive. There's really no, I don't think we did any cognitive tasks, to determine as far as aging goes in this group.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Orly.
Sorry, I have one more question. It's about like when you explain the size of the amygdala, the right amygdala, that the people that meditate have a smaller amygdala than the people that are like new for meditation. I wanted to ask you, what repercussions does this would have like in a lifetime? Would they be just positive, or also there are negative in the emotional responses that they would have? And if this have any kind of relationship with the depression inside that meditation have?
Yeah, so we didn't necessarily find a smaller amygdala. What we found was it was actually a sign of blood flow to the amygdala. So there was less blood flow in that area in the right amygdala. So less reactivity. So I don't think there's any, negative long-term consequences of that. I would say the only thing that, this is not uncommon outside of science research for people new to meditation, is kind of a subtle fear that they're going to lose something, either pleasure in life or, maybe be less passionate. I mean, these are genuine concerns. And what we found, at least in my own experience of long-term meditation and many people that I know, it's the exact opposite. You actually end up experiencing more pleasure, but there's less grasping of it. So, when something is negative, you have less of a desire to push it away. And when something is positive, you have less of a desire to grasp onto it. So really, we think that's really what it's more measuring, is this basic grasping and aversion that seems to be very common in many psychological disorders, for sure. You think of OCD, where you have intrusive thoughts and you react to them emotionally and you can't turn them off. You try to push them away. You certainly have a larger, probably, amygdala reaction to those thoughts. And if you could distance yourself a little bit, perhaps you would get a little bit of relief from those intrusive thoughts. So we think it could be therapeutic at some point. And certainly mindfulness-based cognitive therapy really utilizes these techniques to help people in therapy to get some distance from their thoughts and to be able to kind of down-regulate their sympathetic nervous system so they can relax despite having the activity going on in the background.
I do have a question. In the scale you used to measure the people's happiness, was that only based on what the patients said according to their experience?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
100% self-report. And as we know, there's always a limitation when it's only self-report. But so it's just subjective feeling of well-being, of happiness.
Any other questions? Yeah. Well.
Me.
Yeah, go for it, Juanca.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a question. With all this information, all these findings, how do you think further investigations, further evidence could help to change the way we do medicine? Talking about transcription genes and all this, about prevention of some diseases, or maybe in the palliative care, in the pain or discomfort. How do you think is this whole evidence is impacting now in the way we do medicine, or maybe further with further investigations would do?
So I would say it's being impacted now. There's many hospitals that are doing this. There's a friend of mine who's a physician at University of Rochester, New York. They're doing mindfulness-based training, mindfulness-based compassion training for the physicians working in the hospital to help with stress. There's a lot of this is being implemented here in the university in Madison, Wisconsin. They've implemented some of these things in schools with children. I think that the research is there's enough strong evidence that a lot of these techniques are being brought. Corporate police, there's sports teams that meditate now. I mean, it's really all over the place. There was just a position that opened up at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for a person to teach meditation to all the sports students. So I think that at this point, there's certainly enough evidence that it's valid and that there is real things going on. At least the evidence shows that the longer you meditate, the more effort you put in, and the longer you've been doing it, the more benefit you get. It's really like anything else. Like if you want to play the violin, there's really no shortcut to learning to be a really good violinist. You just have to put in the time. And there's a lot of apps and a lot of things that claim they can get you from point A to point B in a short period of time without the effort. But I'm really suspicious that that these things work. Perhaps sometime at some point science will develop a way to kind of just make you an expert meditator by, scanning your brain and having some, I don't know, some type of noise played in your ear. But, like anything else of lasting value, it comes down to hard work. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Can I make one last question?
Yeah.
Sorry, but how can we use meditation with patients in OBGYN? Like, for example, when they are going into psychoprophylactic stages and stuff for the birth, how can we use it to relieve the woman from all the pain and all the discomfort in pregnancy?
Yeah, again, I think if you're trying to teach it while they're delivering the baby, it's too late. You know, you have to train in advance so it becomes second nature. Because there's so many things that are involved that want to push you out of being present, that the more you train, the more automatic it becomes and the more likely you'll be able to use it. Also with dying patients, I think this is a great example where, you know, people get medicated, but there's still some type of maybe existential fear going on that isn't quite addressed. And meditation can certainly help with this. I know they've experimented in some universities looking at psychedelics that maybe calm the end of life stage transition so it's not so fearful. But I think meditation can have the same effect. It's just one of those things that you really need to train in advance. So when you're in a crisis situation, you just automatically go into it. It's really hard to, you know, meditation is one of those things that I think it's almost impossible to learn when you are in a state of deep distress, because all the parts of your brain that need to focus go offline and you just start in a flight or fight situation. So if you haven't trained to not react, it's going to be really hard in the midst of a crisis.
Sorry, can I ask a question also?
Yep.
I was wondering, I don't know if there have been studies that study like long term, what factors might help somebody meditate and reach a better level of meditation in which they have all these benefits that you've talked about, and what factors exactly, like fear and these stress factors that you just mentioned, can negatively impact. Maybe some medicines can help in the meditation process or something like that.
Yeah, I know having a support group, like anything else, if you have a group of peers that are also interested in the same thing, you're just going to be more motivated. Sometimes it's just something as simple as social pressure. But having a teacher, a meditation teacher, so there is some groups of people that meditation would be contraindicated for, people that have severe trauma, or maybe some type of schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia. You know, for them, they're probably going to be fine meditating for a short period of time, but you wouldn't want them doing maybe a longer retreat where they're spending 6, 7 days, 10 days in meditation. But I would say one of the things that can help is having a teacher, having a support group. They're kind of all over the place now, so at least they are in Madison. They may not be in other parts of the country. Those are very helpful. Making it a habit, you know, is one of those things that really helps. You know, I recommend for people that are new to meditation, just every day, spend 5 or 10 minutes meditating in the morning. If that works for you, you just start to develop a habit of it. It's like exercise where you no longer have to force yourself to do it. It just becomes natural. As far as drugs, again, I know some people have been experimenting with different psychedelics to help maybe get into this state. Richard Davidson talks about the difference between meditative states and meditative traits. So a meditative state is something that is short-term, that is an experience that happens when you're meditating, but it may not carry over to a trait that affects you long-term, that changes your character in a deep way. And I think some drugs can have profound impacts on your state of mind, but they may not carry over to profound shifts in the way you are in the world as far as your habits and your behaviors and the way you think. So. Yeah.
That's a super interesting distinction. Emiliano?
Yes. Well, it's like a very simple question in the matter of reading about mindfulness. I found that it has like some similarities with other therapies that have been done in psychology before. One of them, like the Gestalt therapy, that like tries to get the people to focus on the present instead of worrying about past or future. And I know that the concept mindfulness many years ago. But what is the, I don't know if there is a complement mindfulness, or I don't know if it is using some concepts of this therapy, or is like something completely different that can be used together, or what's in the matter of that? I don't know.
Yeah, I would agree. I think mindfulness is a core component of Gestalt therapy. And there's also a therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy that was based upon Zen training. But I think mindfulness is, it's, really, even if you're not meditating, but you're, I don't know, say you're doing surgery, of course, you have to be mindful and present, and you don't want to be mind wandering, especially when you're learning techniques and things that could endanger a patient. So, I think mindfulness is one of those things that, you're just training your awareness, training concentration. And it's one of those skills that we're really not taught as children. It's kind of just assumed that we all know how to concentrate or how to focus our attention. And now we have apps and phones that are extremely designed well to capture our attention, right? I mean, basically, our attention is sold to a certain degree through advertising and many other things that, everything is trying to capture our attention. And how do we stay on task? And I think it's more important than ever to practice those skills to be able to stay focused when you have all sorts of distractions around you. We know through aging studies that that's one of the things that becomes more difficult as you age, as you have less ability to ignore distractions. So perhaps this could be helpful in that, and certainly during therapy, just being present with the therapist, regardless of what type of therapy. And I think it applies both ways, both to the patient and the therapist. I'll talk about this in a bit, but I did some training where all we did is practice going into a room with a patient and being present with that patient. It was a Zen training with another group with some physicians. It was all mainly doctors, and it was just practicing making a connection in the moment and not being, worried about the last person you saw or their chart or whatever, the millions of things you might be concerned about it, but it's kind of like focusing your attention for that moment, in the present moment. And so I think it works in both ways. And if you're more present, then I think you kind of invite the other people who you're interacting with to be slightly more present. And I will get into that a little bit more once we start the meditation training.
Thanks.
Okay, well, I think if you want, we can just go ahead and start, Rick. I don't know, I guess as you just mentioned, you'll distinguish in this part the meditation types that we were, mindfulness and Zen, and talk more about that part aspect of it.
Yeah, and this, I was thinking what we would do is actually get the direct experience of meditation. So I probably won't talk much about definitions, but I just want everybody to have the experience of what it's like to meditate, and just some basic techniques to begin.
Yes.
So that's what I'll focus on now. And then I think I'll wait. If you have more questions about the meditation part, I'll wait until the end and can answer those. Just to, people may have to go someplace else and we want to have time for the meditation.
Yeah, it's 3 almost. Okay. Yes, for sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so this picture, maybe this is what people think about when they think of meditation, right? Something peaceful, your mind is relaxed. I like to call it the vacation mind. You have no worries, you have no demands. This is unrealistic for most of us. We live in a busy world, and we have to be able to find, if we're gonna have an effective practice without becoming a monk, we have to find a way to practice within our lives. So the idea is that you would have this type of vacation mind regardless of what you're doing. And this is very challenging, and it's why we call it practice and why it takes many years to kind of be able to cultivate this. And I would say that everybody's a beginner to a certain degree. It's not something you graduate from. There's always more to explore. And I'd like to mention about mindfulness, the definition of that, because really this is, you want to enter it in with the spirit of exploration. So you're not trying to become a better person necessarily, or gain some superpower, or you're more becoming curious about how your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions, your experience, moment to moment, is created. And that simple act will give you some distance from the activities of the mind, the body. And so you will find yourself naturally being less reactive, less fused. We like, one of the terms we use is fusion with, say, the thoughts. So there's no separation between what you think and who you think you are. The beginning stage of meditation is just learning to have some separation. So you can have a negative thought perhaps about yourself, but you learn not to react to that as much. And it becomes less of an issue. And then what you find is that these things just naturally start to fade away on their own. And meditation very much is an embodied practice. It's not something you can do just by thinking. It very much involves the body, and a lot of the practice is kind of coming back into the body. So I think to begin, if everybody just wants to get comfortable, and if you're on a chair, maybe sit with your back straight. You can sit towards the end of your chair. The idea is that you are both relaxed and alert at the same time. I happen to be sitting on a meditation cushion. The nice thing about this is it puts your hips slightly above your knees. But regardless of what position you're in, you can also do this lying down. The idea is that you're comfortable, your muscles can relax, and you can experience some relative ease. And then what I'll begin with is just some simple breathing techniques and paying attention to your breath. Because if you can get your body to relax, and you can calm your breath down by just paying attention to it, you're going to find that no matter what's going on, these two things alone will just put you in a more stable, grounded spot. And it's kind of the beginning of a meditation practice. And so this is similar to what would be taught during any type of mindfulness training, and as well as Zen too. It's the beginning is very similar for most traditions. So your hands, you can rest them comfortably wherever you'd like. Your eyes, if you'd like to close them, feel free to do so, or you can keep them slightly open. But the idea is that you would have a soft gaze, soft, relaxed gaze. Your spine is straight. Your head is rested over your spine. And then just notice any place in your body where you may have tension, discomfort, anxiety. And just allow your breath and your awareness to go to that spot. Relaxing your muscles. Relaxing the tension. Taking a few slow, deep breaths in and out. Breathing through your nose. And after you've found the places in your body that feel tense, even if that tenseness hasn't fully gone away, just allow your awareness to kind of sink in your lower abdomen. When you're breathing, allow your belly, feel your belly just to kind of expand and contract. You're not controlling your breath, you're just being aware of it. If you find yourself very distracted still with thoughts, which is not uncommon, one thing you can do for a period of time is just count your breaths if that helps you pay more attention to your breathing. As time goes on, you won't need to count as much, but it can be helpful in the beginning if you feel like you need an anchor to kind of bring you into the present moment. And this focusing on the breath is focused attention. So this is that aspect of meditation. And typically that's the easiest part of meditation to learn. I would say the open monitoring is more challenging. So I usually recommend people begin with kind of a focused attention practice. So you're not trying to control your breath. You're just allowing it to come and go. You're aware of your thoughts arising. If you find yourself caught up in thoughts and no longer paying attention to your breathing, just gently bring your awareness back to your breath. If that's challenging, you can even just bring your awareness to your feet on the ground, or you're feeling the seat on the chair or the cushion or whatever it is you're sitting on. Just anchor yourself in the experiencing the awareness of the body or the breath. In the beginning, you would do this simple practice for 5 or 10 minutes. The important thing is just taking the time out of your day to do it. Invariably, you'll find that as you do it, you might find yourself sitting longer because it just is pleasurable. I do find that it takes me about 20 minutes, even after years of meditation, to kind of calm the thoughts of my mind and have things settle. At first, you might find yourself irritated or bored. Just allow these feelings to arise. They're just passing, ephemeral thoughts and feelings, very much like clouds in the sky. Your awareness is the sky, and all that arises, the sights, sounds, thoughts, textures, all these are just temporarily manifestations, and they will, if you don't pay attention to them, they will just float away on their own. So that's just a very simple introduction to focused attention, using the breath of the body to be aware. I do want to talk a little bit about open monitoring, so you have an experience for that. Some people are more drawn to one type of practice versus the other. And for open monitoring, it's very similar as far as the posture. In the beginning, allowing yourself to have a few large breaths. So the idea is you're breathing from your lower abdomen, similar to what like a baby or an infant would do. You're using your full lung capacity. As we age, we tend to have more constricted breathing. You know, we might just be breathing very shallowly through our upper diaphragm. But the idea is you really want to be able to allow your breath to go deep. And just doing this, this kind of slow, natural, deep breathing will automatically lower your heart rate. It will relax your muscles. It'll bring a few of the benefits of meditation without even really focusing your mind. So you're kind of 50% there just with the physical practice of allowing the breathing to occur and developing a posture that is somewhat relaxed but aware. So for the open monitoring, that same awareness that you're placing on the breath, you're just allowing it to kind of expand, so you're aware of your surroundings. Your eyes may still be closed, or they may be partly open, but they're relaxed. And you just have this awareness of everything that is going on. Sights, sounds, feelings of the body. You're not focusing on any particular object of sensation. but you're just noticing how they arise and how they fall away. If you find yourself lost in thought, without any judgment, just come back to the simple act of being aware of the thought. When you become fully aware of whatever it is you're thinking, that thought will just naturally die away. And kind of the spirit of practice is this curious, engaged kind of wonder at how this moment arises, how these thoughts arise, they're coming and going, the emotions you may be feeling, the sensations. You're not trying to do anything with them. You're just kind of curious, as if you're looking at a new environment for the first time. When you go on vacation and you've been to a place that you've never been to, there's innate curiosity that a lot of us have, and we just happen to be more aware of our environment naturally. We're less caught in mind wandering. And just that experience of newness, of wonder, brings a certain joy and levity by itself. So that's kind of the spirit behind this practice, is engaged but not grasping. And if you find yourself sleepy, just notice the sleepiness, pay attention to it, and that too will come and go and pass. So now I'm going to talk just a little bit about how you would do a mindfulness practice while engaged in an activity. And I'm going to use, I think, driving as an example. So those of us that drive, I guess if you're in a big city, it's possible that you take public transportation and you're not driving. So if you take public transportation and you don't have a car and you're not driving, the same applies. So the idea is that instead of being oblivious to your surroundings, if you're driving, you're feeling your hands on the steering wheel, you're feeling your seat on the car that you're sitting in. If you're on the subway or a bus, you're feeling the feeling of the seat on your butt and the feet on the floor and the vibrations perhaps, the people. You're just paying attention to the present moment, allowing the thoughts and the worries and the concerns to come and go. And you're kind of paying attention in a way that maybe you're not used to, as if you're looking for something different or something new. You're looking at it with fresh eyes. And that naturally just brings you more into whatever activity you're doing. You're going to be more focused, more present. It's going to allow you to be more skillful at whatever it is you're doing. And you're going to be able to react. For example, if a car pulls out in front of you, you're not going to be lost in thought. You're going to be not only better to pay attention to avoid an accident, but you also will just have a more pleasurable experience of, say, driving. Think about those times that we have learned a new skill, and certainly there's some anxiety at times, but there's usually a thrill involved as well because it's new relationships. New relationships, we all have had this experience where there's a certain newness that as time goes on tends to wear off. And it's not that the relationship has changed, but our ability to see it with fresh eyes, we tend to see it more habitually. So just as we want to see whatever it is in our lives that we may be habituated to with fresh eyes, we also want to see our thoughts, our feelings, all these things that just sensations that arise while we're meditating, kind of with this newness that brings more life and interest into the practice itself. So that's really basic introduction to meditation. If you do this 5 or 10 times a day consistently, most people find it very helpful. I have a friend who's a teacher. I know this is anecdotal, but he teaches philosophy, high school philosophy class, and he started to go to class early every day and meditate for 10 minutes before he taught. And within a short period of time, he really noticed just a difference, just doing that simple act each day. And naturally, you'll find if you do it on a regular basis, most people are drawn to it, and it kind of has a life of its own. Now, there is some people that this is just really challenging for whatever reason, psychological, mental, they just aren't going to be able to sit still for a long period of time. Then what I usually recommend is some type of activity practice, yoga, qigong, tai chi, dance. You can be mindful doing all of these things as well. You can bring the same spirit to these practices, but it's a little bit easier to be focused than just sitting still and not moving. I would say that sitting still and not moving is kind of the gold standard for meditation, and it certainly will allow you to experience different states that maybe you haven't experienced before, but it's not required to do mindfulness meditation.
Thank you so much for that, Rick. I don't know if we lost them in the meditation. Maybe they are still meditating. No, but thank you so much. I think this was super interesting. And I don't know how everybody felt. If you guys have questions regarding what you felt about the experience or anything else, if there are any. Are there any comments or questions about this part? You guys feel okay? Did you guys get it? Yeah? I just go, yeah, please, Dr. Arturo Ortiz. He is a very interesting researcher too, a Mexican national researcher, Dr. Arturo Ortiz. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. And just a comment. Recently at the National University of Mexico in the Faculty of Medicine, we started a little program about mindfulness. We had only 5 sessions, each one 2 hours, with the medicine students of the first semester. The idea was to focus on depression, anxiety, and stress, as well as alcohol and drug use. Fortunately, after five sessions, 1 session each week, we found that anxiety, depression, and stress tended to go down. The other variables were not affected. But this was interesting because it's a first step. Maybe it's a baby step, but this is an important step in order to avoid that the students of the first semesters of medicine suffer. They suffer a lot. Even recently, during the recent years, there have been some cases of suicide. So it's important to have this opportunity to talk with you and to know that this approach is successful, has been very successful in different areas of the human behavior. Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think with COVID-19 right now, even more so than ever, if you're in the medical field, the stress that everybody is under right now, I mean, most people are under new stress just being at home, let alone working with the population in a pandemic situation. So absolutely. And just to emphasize, if you're working a long shift and you don't have time to sit for 10 minutes, you can take short breaks, very short breaks. So for example, maybe between rooms, say you're going from one room to the other, just be present with your walking from one room to the next. And it's a short break to kind of reset your system before you enter into the, say, the next patient room. These can be just real simple things that, you know, we don't think about, but you have lots of opportunities to kind of come back to the present moment. And the more often you do that, the more you're training and the more you're practicing. And it will help when you sit outside of activity, but they work, they're complementary, so they very much work together.
Anyone else who wants to make a comment or another question about what you felt during this session, or any ideas for further research about this practice?
I just want to say something. Recently, like since June, I think, I started meditating a lot more, giving myself like a morning ritual or something like that. And it really helped me with my emotions, like everything you've said. Oh, sorry, I'm going to close this. And so recently also I saw a new series on Netflix. It's called Midnight Gospel or something like that. And it talks about meditation, and it's like a podcast or something like that. But it talks about how in meditation you sort of observe like your emotions, and you see them expand and how your mind reacts to them. But it's very difficult for me to observe them. Like I really try to do this thing you told us about, concentrating more on our breathing and try to focus on that, and not so much about, I don't really understand this thing about observing your emotions moving through the meditation time, you know. It's really something I don't quite understand.
Yeah, I think the breath, that's why the beginning is the breath, because breath is most intimate. It's always there. You're always breathing. And so it's always something you can use as an anchor. And you know, if you were going to learn a musical instrument you've never played, you've had no musical training, you wouldn't expect yourself to be good, you know, to play any type of piece. I mean, essentially you'd be able to play no music when you first started. And most people would not judge themselves for their inability to play some type of amazing piece of music when they just pick up an instrument. But I think we tend to judge ourselves maybe a little too harshly with meditation, is that it's the same way. We're all beginners to a certain degree, and in the beginning, we're going to be bad at it. You know, it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. The key is not to give up and not to judge how your future practice may be based upon your present practice. So just because certain things don't happen now doesn't mean they won't become easier as time goes on. It's with the commitment and the daily practice, then you just will find yourself in new places that you didn't even know existed, like being able to observe your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
It happens one day, and a lot of times you only see the changes in hindsight. In fact, I would argue that the people around you will see the changes of your meditation practice before you do. They'll notice you're a little calmer, you're less reactive, you're nicer to be around, and you know, you kind of feel like you're the same as you always were, just because it's difficult to see ourselves. So you know, it's kind of just a plug to be patient, and that how you're doing now is not a factor of how you will be able to practice in the future.
Yeah, like you said, it's a practice, so it takes time.
I like to say it's mastering the art of failure. That's a Zen saying we have, is that in Zen, we're always mastering the art of failure. We're always starting over. Every time you mind wander, you start over at the beginning. And it's difficult for driven people. You know what? It's a hard thing to you know, not be good perhaps at something in the beginning and to judge ourselves. So yeah, thanks for commenting.
Anyone Anyone else has a further question? No? Or comment? Okay. Well, actually, I was going to make a last comment. I was of the group that actually felt that controlling the reactivity to some emotions might have like some consequences, because reactivity is like a surveillance, I don't know, uh, physiological response for doing some things. But actually, I really like that in the results of the studies, you pointed that actually the negative, the images, or how to say it, the well, the situations, they just the ones that have meditation or the ones that don't have it, they have the same response. Actually, one of the positive things is to have a more focused think on positive situations or images, because actually we need to react in negative situations, because it's like something physiological to happen. It will very something painful to find these results. And thank you very much, doctor, for your intervention. Mariel had another meeting to attend. That's why I was like coaching the last questions. And well, thank you very much for all the team for your attendance and your attention. Well, the idea of the internal meetings to have like more like a deep knowledging about some topics in neuroethics, so you can like develop some more than knowledge abilities, and to talk more closely to the teachers. So because it's very different to have a very little group for you to clear your doubts. You
I think he's gone.
Yeah, it froze up. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate being able to share. And
thank you, Rick. Was very, very impressive. I have many questions, but I need to think about them. Yes. And then contact you.
Yes. And certainly there's a time and a place for thinking, and of course we all need it sometimes. So yeah, and there's a time to let go of it. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, and any articles that I referred to. If you know, there's a lot of research out there. I'm happy to, give you a link to the article itself if you want to dig deeper.
Great. Thank you, Rick.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Mm.